Nikiwe Solomon is from social anthropology. She's an environmental anthropologist, very interested in the rivers of the Western Cape, and we look forward to what you have to say.
Today I'm just going to talk about my particular research. I'm looking at the Kills River here in Cape Town. And I'm talking about our entangled relationships with our natural environment. And I'll be drawing largely from the walks that I took along the river, the interactions with the different communities that I engaged with as I did my research. So as typical anthropologist, I'll start off with a parable, like a popular parable of the blind men and an elephant, which originated in India but has been used in many types of scholarship, ranging from systems thinking, computer science, and anthropology. And particularly, I draw from Francis Nyamjo's work on Blinded by Sight, Divining the Future of Anthropology in Africa. So perhaps many of you have heard of this parable, but to put it into this particular context, there are many versions of the story, and I hope that this metaphorical comparison demonstrates the complexities and the multiplicities of knowing the Kills River for my own research. So in this story, we have a group of blind men who have heard of this strange creature called the elephant, but they have never encountered this strange worldly creature, and they don't know its form or shape. So a merchant came to their village one day and offered to take them to this creature. On the way to this creature, they collaborated, holding hands and guiding each other, and talking about how they're going to come to know this creature through touching it. On arrival to where the elephant was, the merchant took each blind man, one at a time, to the elephant. So to the elephant, and the merchant took the first man to the left front leg, and the second man was taken to the rear of the elephant and felt his tail. The third man was put on top of the elephant and he felt his ears. The fourth man felt the trunk, and so on until everybody got to feel the elephant. After each of these men had touched the elephant, they were excited and each believed that they had figured out what this creature was. They left the site together, bubbling with anticipation, eager to share their findings. On arriving back in their village, sitting together, the second man, who felt the tail, decided to take the lead. He said, "This creature is like a rope with tufted ends." "No," exclaimed the other one. The first man, he said, "This creature is like a tree trunk," the one who had felt the legs. And the one who felt the trunk was adamant that this creature was like a thick snake, and the one who felt the ears was convinced that this creature was similar to fans. So the disagreements continued because there are so many versions of the story. The versions of the outcomes in these disagreements differ, with varying levels of flashback, with some violent and others subtle, with some arguing that the methods of analysis were flawed. Others argued that the others were dishonest and incompetent. But in this story, each blind man believed that their version of knowing the elephant was true. This metaphorical analysis has been useful for my research and thinking about the river. For like the blind men, every exploratory encounter has been reduced to a particular way of knowing, and this particular way of knowing could be, for like in the blind man story, a conservationist whose goal is to protect ecosystems and focus is less on people. Perhaps another was an anthropologist whose focus is on how society works and meanings in culture and relationship in relation to the river, and not really concerned about the ecosystems and the lives, the types of creatures it supports and by its flows. And perhaps the other blind man was the resource economist who was interested in how the natural resources can be exploited for economic benefit, but not considering the philosophy of financializing the commons. Or the other, an engineer interested in building canals and stormwater drains to prevent flooding or nearby settlements, and not speaking to the climate scientists on the reduction of natural spaces for carbon capture and what it means for urban spaces in a time of climate change. Or perhaps the blind man was the government official whose strategies have to be thought and implemented in according to electoral cycles, because they lack the certainty of being present in the job beyond their term. So whatever the case may be, this story helps me think about the challenges that we have inherited in thinking about river management, or rather river sovereignty. The management of water and development of infrastructure is deeply rooted in the societal development agenda. My intention is not to deconstruct particular modes of knowing or governance or practices, but rather to ask what is silenced when we think of particular frameworks, focusing on the particulars and not seeing the bigger picture. For instance, in South Africa, we can't think about societal development agenda without thinking about colonialization, spatial marginality, state formation, poverty eradication, economic growth, and so forth. And like the blind men, we focus on our expertise. We begin to confuse this as the nature of the world. And as Leslie Green argues in a quite recent paper of hers about moving knowledge, it limits our abilities to imagine beyond our own disciplines. So from working along the river, these are the kind of challenges that I encountered. So when I needed to collect data, there were particular people that I needed to go to. For the actual flowing river, it was a park management issue. For looking at the infrastructure, you're looking at the stormwater control and so on. When you want to deal with the community, you have to go to somebody else again. So trying to get all that information for a particular river, and how does that actually shape the flow of the river and impact the people and the ecosystems that are benefiting from that river. Latour, from working along the river and drawing from Latour's concept of the three goddess sisters of reason, the ways of knowing the Kels River in my research have been framed along scientific, technical efficiency, and economic productivity. Other ways of knowing that river have been pushed to the periphery. The Kels River passes through multi-user landscapes, and the stories I tell in my research are drawn from interactions with people, plants, animals, critters, and water along its path, like I've mentioned. So for months, I followed the river's course. I sat by the river, and at times I fell in it, and visited people's homes. I participated in river cleanups, in water management planning meetings, and I observed. In certain sections of the upper reaches of the river seemed dead and with no life, and other than the water itself just flowing downhill in a canal. The river seemed cut off from its surrounding and couldn't help but feel disappointed and depressed at seeing it in this manner. Okay. And as you move further along and the canal ended, it became more alive with plants and creatures and vibrant sounds. As you move past the wastewater treatment plants, it looks grayish and sick, and you see signs of eutrophication, but also a lot of bird life in that space. But then it recovers, and you move through the wetlands, and it seems seemingly healthy. The way people described the river was when it was in flood, they used terms that actually gave it personhood, like it can be destructive, it's a nuisance, it's angry, and speaking about the flows. And when they spoke about the pollution, in particular the stench that came from the river because of poorly treated effluent, one participant said, "It's obvious that our land treats us so badly because it's giving as good as it gets." The issue of safety was also brought up because this has been seen as a place that is isolated and is therefore the harbinger of bad activity, where people, quite a few bodies have been found along the Kels River. So it's like, because it's isolated, criminal activity can go on there. And then along its path is quite a beautiful gem. I loved working in this space, in the Khayelitsha Wetlands Park. So it's one of the major natural water filters of the Kels River. And the Kels River's natural flow, as mentioned before, has been highly modified because of industrial and poorly treated waste water effluent from the upper stream, and particularly the Belleville water treatment plant. So the river was once seasonal, drying up in summer months, but now, because of the effluent, it runs throughout the year. The Khayelitsha Wetlands Park is a pleasant urban wetland park and is the poster child of sustainable development in townships for the city of Cape Town. The area was selected as a critical biodiversity hotspot of conservation-worthy status due to it being a functional ecosystem, supporting various plant and animal species, carrying out important regulatory services such as flood attenuation and water cleansing. The local communities also enjoyed this wetland park for recreational activities, collection of medicinal plants, ritual cleansing, watering and feeding livestock, and more. So over the months, I witnessed many changes to the wetland with the introduction of more infrastructure from the city of Cape Town, and the planning had been going on for about 10 years, and it happened in consultation with economists, engineers, some natural scientists, some social scientists, and also involved public participation. All the tick boxes were ticked. So in terms of involvement of the different stakeholders, you can say all the tick boxes had been ticked. So of interest to me was the introduction of this palisade fencing around the park. This was introduced perhaps as a border for the park, zoning it off the area as separate to the formal and informal housing in the area. So the park and keeping like the separation between the different types of housing. However, within the short space of time, this fence had been up. It had already been torn down to create access points for the locals and livestock not allocated in the earlier planning for the park. Just as an aside, when I spoke about this same scenario, I had used the word vandalized, showing a particular framework that I was using. And thanks to Magzi, he highlighted the problematization of that. The use of the word vandalism also shows my way of particular thinking when it comes to these issues. Could I have looked at it differently, as in, was it really vandalism or is it a form of protest? Was it correcting a wrong? But I wouldn't know this until I spoke to the person who did it. And again, it's important in highlighting the issues of partial truths in the way we do our research. So back to that incident. In conversations while digging on the vegetable gardens, like as I was doing my ethnographic research, one of the gardeners, a woman in her 50s, talked about this issue, and I raised it up, like, what do you think happened with that, with the breaking down of the fence? What she said was, what do they, as in the city of Cape Town, expect? They do these things without talking to people and expect us to just be okay with it. Before they started doing these things, development things, people could just easily go to the wetlands and feed their goats and cattle. You could even just go and get some special plants, but now then this fence, and people have to walk all the way around it to get in. Even with the water meters that they've put in our houses, they don't even explain what it is. The next thing you see, you have a 10,000 Rand water bill. I'll never have that thing in my house. They just want to make money from us. So the arguments that did arise, there was argument that the city did call for public participation in making of and imagining the park. But the women that I spoke to felt that all those engagements were always futile because they never understood what was being said in those spaces. The type of language that was used even though an interpreter may have been present, still didn't make sense to them. Also, the process of calling these meetings was in such a manner that those that were already in the know were part of the process. So from this, one can see that there are various ways of knowing the Khayelitsha wetlands, which are also an important part of the Kills River. The city of Cape Town commissioned several environmental assessment studies on the wetland and the potential for economic opportunity as an environmental benefit that could be derived from the park. In the process of creating the space for the benefit of the community, to the community themselves, it implied that the fence and the gates implied creation of parameters by the state, a command and control, which possibly could have been unintentional, an approach to control movement in and out of the commons, who it's accessed by and by what. And also it speaks to how the frameworks within this space and in thinking about water management in the context of South Africa, given its history and status as a developing country. So my particular example looks at the human relationships to the river, to the wetland, but what is silenced by using particular ways of looking and interacting with our environment. Through my research, I explore the limitations of silencing diverse ontologies and the potential of embracing plurality in the ways of knowing and relating to water. I ask what possibilities are opened up when we take seriously multiple meanings of water, the multiple ontologies of water for its governance in theory and practice. For example, Professor Fresh talked about how the river in New Zealand was given statehood and personhood. So they opened up the way of knowing in the environment. It opened up to the multiplicities of the meanings of water. So my argument is water is not neutral in the sense of its political and its economic. The river is not neutral. It has always been a key part of any landscape in the world, transforming and shaping geological forms, political and economic systems, influencing the way humans move and live, and the way we think and interact with our environment. And so ways of knowing it that claim truth and objectivity, particularly in terms of its management, do a real disservice to the multiplicities of our interactions and understanding of relationships with water and water bodies. And like in the story of the blind man and the elephant, and I quote from Nyamjo's work, is it possible to achieve the level of objectivity needed to see and represent the elephant or the river for what it truly is, a complex and nuanced reality that cannot be easily reduced to its constituent parts or limited to sensory perceptions? Does it matter what the elephant, or in this case the river, has to say if it could speak, and how it is perceived and represented? So in my research, I try to listen to the river. I try to try and deal with these issues. So the river is not just an object of social relationships or a natural resource to be extracted for humans, but it's also a producer of knowledge. I consider the river as agentive, as a contributor to relations between humans, between animals, plants, soil, infrastructure, and policy. But how does the river speak? You're probably asking, how do you listen to a river? So drawing from Anna Ting, she suggests that paying attention to assemblages, which entails awareness of where and how other species, including us humans, assemble around each other. The second approach suggests the observation to bodily form. For instance, plants continuously grow and change based on the health or the changes in the environment. These could be observed in the awareness of the river. But I'm not trying to romanticize anything or have a particular way, like to open it up to a multiplicity of ways of thinking. So transdisciplinary work is particularly challenging, with the very little guidance or expertise on how to work and to think together beyond what we are experts at, thinking beyond the human and thinking in terms of relationality. But as an emerging researcher and a teacher living in South Africa, what skills are we equipping ourselves and students of seeing and thinking of the big picture in times of climate change and the calls for decolonial thinking in the academy? Thinking beyond subject-object relations and society here and nature out, as society here and nature out there, how do we take seriously other ways of knowing water for a more inclusive interaction with water? Moving beyond the conventional approaches allows us to acknowledge the complexities of relationships with water and the non-human, and thereby responding and caring better through water sovereignty and rather than limiting it to command, control, predict models. Thinking of these relationships together with the social and the hydrological is sensitive to issues of justice for humans, soils, plants, and animals. It also highlights the complexities of governance and politics in a context where studies related to water often reduce it to its economic resource to be exploited. This may be a particularly difficult task, but I remain encouraged by Donna Haraway's words in her book, where she talks about staying with the trouble. She offers the thought-provoking ways of how we can interact with our home and Earth and all its inhabitants, where it is taking care of the Earth in a way that makes multi-species environmental justice the means and not just the goal. And I ask, what possibilities are open up when we take seriously the multiple meanings of water, the multiple ontologies of water for its governance in theory and practice? And again, as Professor Ferris just touched on this, when she speaks about giving rights to the river in New Zealand and also in the river in India, the inclusion of Mother Nature into the Ecuadorian constitution. When we look at frameworks again in South Africa, what are the possibilities for expanding it in similar ways to be more inclusive for decolonial approaches to the way we deal with water?
So thank you very much, Nikiwe, for that. I listened to Nikiwe speak a few weeks ago, and I was totally intrigued by the different perspectives we can have. And I think it's a very useful conversation for us to lead into.